What if I told you the strongest man in the room was already in danger? Most battle manga treat strength like it's the final answer, but Tenkaichi flips that idea on his head and turns strength into a weapon. And the scariest part? The moment a fighter looks unstoppable, that's usually when the real danger begins. Because in this series, strength is the belief that the body alone can decide the fight. Power, pressure, brute force. The idea that if you're strong enough, nothing else matters. But Tenkaichi keeps asking a crueler question. What happens when strength still isn't enough? In this manga, it treats pure strength as the beginning to a problem. Because the moment raw power becomes readable, it becomes something your opponent can survive, adapt to, and reverse it against you. That's where pure strength stops feeling absolute. And that rule is written all over this manga because again and again, Tenkaichi proves the same brutal truth that being strong is one thing, but knowing what to do with that strength is everything. And there are 3 fights that displays that truth better than any other. The first one being Hosoin versus Jinsuke. One man dedicates his life to training due to his horrible past. The other was naturally gifted from birth. On the surface, Hosoin looks like the obvious answer. His talent and confidence make it feel like his gifted power should win. And it's not hard to see why. Hosoin built an entire school of combat around his natural instincts. His spear technique came naturally in a way most fighters spend their whole lives chasing. The kind of talent that makes everyone around him feel like they're already losing before the fight even starts. That's what Jinsuke was walking into. Jinsuke seemed like your regular samurai, but his past gave him purpose. Ever since he was a kid, he was raised to give praise to the gods. But somehow fate twisted him into feeling like his weakness as a child stood against God's will. All due to seeing his father killed right in front of his eyes by a weird looking samurai who told him these words.
In this world, the weak die first because that's the way God made it.
So he bled and fought tooth and nail to reach the pinnacle of mastery so that even God itself can't break him. Every day was another rep, another step away from the kid who watched his father die weak. By the time he faces Hosoin, weakness isn't even an option he recognizes anymore. So when Hosoin's raw gift met Jinsuke's craft, this fight stopped being about talent alone. It became a test to see who breaks first, a natural genius or a man who turns suffering into discipline. And the longer this fight went on, the more Hosoin's talent started running into something it couldn't casually overwhelm. And by the time the pebble scene hits in chapter 47, it felt like every year Jinsuke spent grinding in the dirt is finally paying off. That's when the fight becomes the proof that craft outlasts its gift. Because potential is loud, but mastery is final. And when reading this manga, I thought it was gonna stay grounded to reality in some way. But the Hino Choko versus Kamizumi fight proved me wrong fast. At first, Choko feels like there's nothing behind the mask but violence. But when the mask comes off, that's when the demon god appears. Raw strength born into it, raised in a world where nothing else mattered except for his mother's milk. So the moment he runs into Kamizumi, this fight becomes a question of what happens when something unstoppable meets someone who spent a lifetime of learning how to stop exactly that. No matter what Choko did, he couldn't get through Kamizumi. And for a while, it felt like Kamizumi had complete control over the fight. Every exchange, every opening, he was already there. But to finish Choko, he had to do the unthinkable. This was the turning point where Kamizumi stopped feeling like the master and became the ceiling as he enters the gate of the Celestial Awakening. He was no longer just a martial artist with a blade, he was a martial god. And once Kami reached the pinnacle of the martial arts, Choko stopped looking like an untouchable monster. Cause this fight alone makes one thing clear. Technique doesn't just survive raw strength, it dismantles it. And the man who proved that didn't walk away intact. Kamizumi got stronger, but the clock started to reverse on him. That became the cost of breaking Choko. And that's something raw strength could have never done alone. But the cruelest thing this manga does to strength happens next. Musashi vs Honda was the one fight that proved nobody in this series was safe. On one side, Musashi was a living legend who had never lost a bout and carried that record like it's the only thing keeping him alive. On the other, Honda displayed pure strength in its rawest form. A fighter who had never been scratched before stepping into this ring. Not once. It was pure strength against adaptability. He even moved like the kind of force that should have been too much to solve. But the instant he was cut, something shifted. The myth started cracking, and it was something Honda had no answer for. That was the moment Musashi stopped trying to endure Honda's strength and started solving it, proving that overwhelming power becomes vulnerable once someone reads its rhythm. And Honda's pressure pushed Musashi so far beyond his limits that by the end, Musashi's fighting with part of his ribs gone while still closing the distance, because the only other option was death. That's what made this fight the clearest example of this whole video's idea. In Tenkaichi, strength without adaptation is just pattern, and Musashi broke it, figuratively and literally. Out of all these fights, these three stuck out to me for the same reason. They all kept showing the same ugly truth. Strength by itself is shaky, because in Tenkaichi, somebody always got something more training, more understanding, more adaptability, more skill, and that something was always enough. In every one of these fights, strength runs into something it just can't overpower. And that's when Tenkaichi exposes the real weakness of brute force, because by itself, it can only go in one direction. That's what these fights kept saying to me. Raw power was never the final answer, only the first thing a great fighter learns to break. So if the strongest men kept falling short, what exactly were the winners carrying that they weren't? What did strength alone keep failing to become? Because this manga shows the same brutal truth. Power by itself is just material. It can be read, redirected, endured, and broken. Tenkaichi's real message is that strength alone was never the answer, only the ore, not the blade. And if Tenkaichi made pure strength look incomplete, Sunken Rock is what happens when brutality becomes the real language of power. Click here and you'll see what I mean. Ja Mata.